get back on our grind. We have a really good game today. Karpov with the white pieces against Unzicker. We'll go over that, then we'll head over to Leech. Do some blitz arenas and see how much we didn't learn from looking over these games. Let's jump right into it. We have here, like we said, Karpov with the white pieces against Unzicker. This is, it says Olympiad -21 final. Apparently was held in Nice, 1974. The Soviet Union versus Germany. Not sure how the tournament structures were back then. Not sure if this is just a regular Olympiad or sub-21 or I don't know. But we have a great game here. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Karpov with the white pieces. Goes at e4 on the first move. e5. We're going to kind of go through these first few moves kind of quick because they're somewhat of a theoretical nature. Not the point of going over these games. A lot of times too, like this is pretty old theory, so a lot of it is outdated. So, but we have a Spanish opening with bishop b5. Unzicker goes with a6. Bishop a4, knight f6. This is all very, very normal, very theoretical. Karpov played systems like this with black all the time as well. Even as a system named after him, the Karpov Zaitsev variation. I think he used it a lot in his match against one of his world championship matches against Kasparov. We go c3. See here quickly, the plan is to strike in the center. How was the arrows again? Was it alternate? Yeah, strike in the center with c4. And here we're going to see some typical plans, which usually involve bishop b7, knight a5, and c5. Playing for the center as well. Need to get that that counterplay going. You just can't stand by and watch. So we have these moves. Unzicker responds with castles. King safety is key. h3, just to avoid, you know, bishop g4 ideas mainly, right? Knight a5, going after the bishop here. We have bishop c2, c5, and finally we see the strike in the center with d4. Already getting messages, okay. So we have queen c7 on the board, knight bd2. Again, all this is very, very theoretical. This has been played probably thousands of times. So the knight has achieved here its mission on a5. So first off, it wanted to win a tempo here against the bishop attacking, right? But more than anything, it wanted to make way for that. This pawn push could be something that's available to them, right? To strike in the center. And so since the knight has already completed its mission and it's really not doing much of anything now on a5, it's time to go back and exert some more pressure in the center. So he returns with knight c6. And here we have all these games commentated by Grandmaster Marin. I don't know how you say it. Marks this next move as interesting, claiming space in the center. Also, you know, these moves are kind of, they're very committal, closing out the position in the center and resolving all the tension. A lot of times you don't want to do that, but in this case I guess it's interesting because you're asking the knight some serious questions about how it's going to develop, you know, or where it's headed to. So we have d5 and Unzicker responds with knight to d8, and Karpov continues with his active play, now going for a4, attacking what might be a little bit of a vulnerable pawn structure here, just because development isn't great here on the queen side. We still have the bishop in its original square, the rook as well, and the knight is not ideally placed on d8. So now is a great time to start, you know, really pressuring these pawns. Unzicker responds very naturally with rook b8, getting the rook out of any potential, you know, pin situations. Current as it was, Karpov was immediately threatening a takes b5, since a takes b5 is not possible, because then the rook hangs on a8. Okay, so Karpov gets his, or Unzicker rather, gets his rook out of the way. Mano. Sería una lástima que yo lo que cojo es como un viewer por stream y te tenga que banear. One of the OGs. Come on now. Este tipo. Así no se puede. Así no se puede. Oh my goodness, phone's blowing up. Supone que tú estás trabajando. ¿O tienes meeting? Alright, a4. Rook b8. And a takes b5, a takes b5, opening up the file here for our friend on a1. Yeah, for real. So we have b4. Alright, cool. Scan is complete. My system is clean. Awesome. Yeah, a takes b5 and b4. Karpov does not give him a break. He keeps on pressuring here, pawn chain on the queen side. So knight b7, the knight's trying to find a way back into the game. Knight f1. Typical maneuver of these types of positions. First off, this bishop needs to come out and play, right? E3 might be a good square. Bishop g5 might be a good square. I mean, there's lots of good possibilities here. Most likely it'll end up on e3. But also the knight has some maneuvers here where it could either go to g3 and eye some squares here on the king side, or in some cases it even goes to h2 and to g4. These are just general plans. I mean, I guess it depends a lot on the order that's played, but the general idea here is that the knight is heading over to the king side. So yeah, knight f1, very typical stuff. Bishop d7, and we see here bishop e3, and we have our first comment for the game, so we kind of like breeze through those first opening moves. And here we say that bishop e3 was a new move at the time. By putting pressure on c5, white complicates black's fight for the a file. Before, it looks like bishop d2 used to be a pretty normal move, or pretty common move. Rook a8, knight e3. This is a possible continuation, right, of a game that was played. Or not possible, this is an actual game that was played between Spassky and Korchnoi in Kiev in 1968. So rook fc8, king h2. We're just going to go over this really quick. Queen d8. We see that the battle here is for the a file. It's the only open file. So queen a7, rook there. And what the problem is with the problem with capturing the knight is that you just have a repetition. The queen can't get out, right? So the rook is just going to take the queen. The only square that the queen has available is a7, and then after rook a8, the only square available is b7, then rook b8, and we have a repetition, and that's how the game finished. Karpov, on the other hand, He deviates from this. He doesn't want any draws. Squash the opponents. He goes to bishop e3. And here the battle for the a file begins. We have rook a8, right? And so the natural thing is, Karpov doesn't want to, obviously doesn't want to recapture on a. He doesn't want to capture on a8, just surrendering the a file completely. So he develops his queen with the idea that if rook takes a8, or a1 rather, I can't get my pieces right, then rook takes a1, and we're going to be the ones that have control of the only open file in the game, which is going to be pretty important. And so here Unzicker plays rook fc8, and our commentator says this natural move apparently consolidates c5 and puts pressure on the c file. Both aspects are illusory, as the game will show, but as we will see, black's mistake will come only later. Karpov in this position recommended, instead of rook fc8, to play rook fb8 as the start of a more effective regroupment. However, his suggested continuation isn't the most critical, as we will see here. We got some variations that we could look over. So knight g3 is one option, okay? So I have a couple of options here. Knight g3, bishop d3 is another option. Bishop d3 is not the best because of queen c8. Queen c8 is a good move. It leaves a d8 square available for the bishop. Okay, so knight g3. Why is this a problem? Because that's where it's going to regroup. So c4, winning a tempo against the bishop on d3. The bishop has to come back. Rook takes, rook a8, right? Bishop a7. We don't want to exchange the rook. We don't want to move the rook from the a file either, so we block the a file with bishop a7, kind of doing your most here to fight for the control of the a file. And then bishop d8, a very, very strong move. The immediate threat, right, is bishop b6 over here. And of course the bishop wouldn't be able to take because the rook on a1 is hanging. So if we have bishop d8, you have to respond with queen c1, defending this rook, right? So there isn't any pin business here on the a file. Bishop c7. And we have this position where black could follow up with moves like queen d8 and bishop b6, exchanging this kind of weak bishop here. It's really restricted from its pawns in the center, so we'd like to exchange it and continue our battle for the a file. So the bishop d3 isn't the best. So after rook fb8, there's also knight g3 as a possibility. This is a possible plan that we discussed earlier, the regrouping of the knight. So then we have queen c8, rook ec1, and again we see the same idea, right? This bishop here, it's not really doing a lot. It's not really doing anything, to be honest. So we see the same plan here for black, right? Just bishop d8, with the idea that we're going to reroute this guy over here to b6 and just find a more active square, maybe possibly even exchange him for our buddy here on e3. So we have bishop d8, and we have a couple of options here. Bishop d1 is one option, right? And then the other one is bishop d3. It's kind of the same thing. This is really strategical game where both sides are just looking for the best placement for their pieces. After bishop d3, however, we have this line c4, again winning a tempo against this bishop over here. We see kind of a similar line like we saw earlier. Bishop c2, rook takes e1, rook takes e1, rook a8, and since the bishop is already on d8, this idea that we saw before, trying to fight for the a file, bishop a7, doesn't work because black can immediately play bishop b6, exploiting the pin here on a1. Okay, so yeah, maybe we don't want to allow black to win a tempo with this push of a pawn advance to c4. So we go bishop d1 to reroute the bishop that way instead. So bishop b6 and bishop b2. So both sides have successfully found more active squares for their bishops. Black can proceed now with rook takes a1, rook takes a1, and rook a8. Queen b2, again, we don't want to exchange there and just giving up control completely of the only open file in the game. Queen b8, rook a2, threatening to double with queen a1, right? Threatening this to kind of get a stronghold of the a file as much as possible. Okay. And so rook a7, kind of the same idea. Also the bishop here we see is pretty key. After queen a1, you're not really threatening anything because there's recaptures here with the bishop. So, and we have this position where black has pretty much neutralized the pressure on the a file and has a normal position. Kind of hard to grasp all this and to see all this at the board if you haven't seen this position before. So, and it's really hard to criticize the move rook fc8 here and call it a mistake, because you know it's pretty deep stuff. But we see here the amazing understanding that Karpov has of this position. Again, we kind of see the same plan again. This is the actual game. This is how it went. Karpov played bishop d3. Okay. Again, we have to find a way to kind of regroup our pieces, put them in better squares, and this takes a little bit of time because the game is kind of blocked out here in the center. And g6. All right, so I want to go over a quick comment here that was made in the game. It says the merits behind the bishop e3 move are obvious. If black tries to neutralize the pressure along the a file with, say, queen d8, well, this loses because the rook takes a8, rook takes a8, and b takes c5. Okay, so if you take with the pawn here, obviously we're hanging knight takes e5, right? And if we go instead of this, if we go knight takes c5, then we could do bishop takes c5 and knight takes e5. So yeah, black is having a little bit of a hard time here contesting that a file, which is really the main thing that's going on here in this game. Whoever gets ultimate control of that file is going to have a decisive advantage when it's all said and done, because it's really the only way possible to infiltrate the enemy position. So we have knight g3. g6 is a pretty logical move as well. Okay, so the idea of g6, like we said, we know that this knight is going to come to the king side, and we know that this square is the one that it might like. So g6 kind of just anticipating that the knight's going to be jumping along here, bothering, doing its thing. So we kind of take control of a square that could be important down the line. So bishop f8. Another idea here behind this g6 move, we might find a more suitable home for this bishop, maybe on g7. There might be some ideas way down the road of some f5 breaks. I don't think so. But it's a possibility, you know. And kind of the bishop is just like stepping out of the way. Is like, hey, don't mind me, guys. I'm just gonna do my thing over here. Cover these dark squares and just try to play as solidly as possible. Black's just trying to hold on to the position here. So we have rook a2. Simple chess, disposing over more space. I think he meant to say disposing of more space. White finds it easier to fight for the open file. So here, it's a very simple plan. We just want to bring the rook over, you know, and kind of put as much pressure here as possible. So we have our typical move that we've seen many, many times before. c4. And here we see a curious move from Mr. Karpov. Pretty good player. He might be a world champion someday. So bishop b1. Strange move. You might think, what the heck is going on? He's just getting in the way of the rook here. His play makes absolutely no sense. All right, so it says bishop e2 looks more logical as it allows the quick rook 1 to a1. Okay. But in this case, Unzicker might have switched to Rubinstein's plan. So after bishop e2, we have rook takes a2, queen takes a2, knight d8, knight h2, knight e8, f4, kind of switching over. We've already completed our objective on the queen side of taking control of the a file. Now we're creating a second front here to play on, so that's going to be the king side. f4 takes, f6, super solid, and knight f7, followed by knight g7 and knight e5 with a very solid position. However, this is the way the game goes. This move, bishop b1, involves a small psychological trap. It may seem that white has given up the fight for the a file and that he is going to focus on the king side plan based on f2, f4. And here Unzicker, our boy Unzicker, got a little confused. He said, what the heck is going on? This guy's lost his mind. We've been playing for the a file the whole time. Now he goes bishop b1. He responds with a mistake. Queen d8 is not a good move. Queen d8 preparing rook takes a2 over here, followed by rook a8, not suspecting anything. A better option would have been incredibly enough to play knight d8, okay, with the idea that after knight h2, again, typical plans, guys, and we're just kind of rerouting the knights and the pieces to more active squares. Knight e8, really good move with the same plan, once again, just playing super solid. f4, takes, f6, knight f3, knight f7, same plan again. It's going to be really hard to break through here. And so queen d8 allows a absolutely spectacular move that probably Unzicker just wasn't suspecting at all. He just didn't see the idea behind it. It is a fairly abstract move. It's strange. It's a strange move. But when we see how the game progresses later on, we're going to see this move that makes a lot of sense. Remember, the whole thing about this is control for the a file. And if white could play undisturbed here, he would just put as many heavy pieces as he could on the a file, infiltrate through there, and maybe start to create weaknesses on the king side, right? Of course, it's not that easy because white isn't playing by himself. He's playing against the black pieces here, and Unzicker wasn't a pushover. So we have to kind of like create an obstacle here where black won't be able to get in the way of our plan of putting all the pieces on the a file, taking control of that a file, right? And this is a plan that we've already seen in some of the analysis earlier, and an absolutely incredible move here, demonstrating very deep positional understanding. Bishop a7. What a move, right? What an absolute move. This is one of Karpov's most famous moves. That's saying a lot. Karpov is pretty good. Because of black's queenside piece congestion, special mention goes to the knight on b7, right? The fight for the a file is effectively over. Curiously, white will not try to develop his initiative on this wing, but will use his partial success as a warranty against black's potential activity along the a file. I don't think that A is supposed to be an octave. I think it's an A. Interesting that the pianist would play it like that. Okay. The main events will take place on the king side, And black will just have to sit and wait for the execution of the plan. That's what we talked about, right? We're gonna, once we take control of this A file here, and as the commentator kindly points out, this job's pretty much done. We're going to switch over and open a second front here on the king side. So we have bishop a7. What an amazing move. Two options here. Unzicker played knight e8. And this position is already getting a little bit tough. It's a positional squeeze, or black's going to have to suffer a little bit. It says it's a little bit too late to fight against white's domination with the move queen c7. Here we have queen e3, planning, where did my cursor go? Planning bishop c2 and rook 1a1. Because we have queen e3, knight c5. Interesting move. Trying to desperately fight here for the a file. So b takes. D takes c5, right? The bishop really has nowhere to go. It's trapped, so you can afford to use a tempo and recapture the pawn. But now white has a really strong move in queen g5, threatening a boy here, the knight on f6. So you gotta do something about that, right? You have two options. There's knight e8, where the game could continue with knight h5. Rook takes a7, rook takes a7, queen takes a7. And the little guy here on e5, well, he's hanging. Nobody's looking out for him. b4. And a pretty spectacular finish to this line is knight takes f7, king takes f7, e5. And these guys are going. They're going. They're practically gone. So that's one way to address the issue of the knight here on f6. And then the other way, the logical move, which I think a lot of people would opt for instead of moving back with the knight, is bishop g7. Which in that case, we have another very strong move here in d6. This is really deep stuff here going on. Queen b7. I'm trying to see here. There's no mention as to why that pawn is best left alone. So queen takes d6. Bishop takes c5 might be a cop-out. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe even queen takes e5, right? Once we trade off the queens, the bishop is coming out, and we're just up an entire piece. Yeah, that's got to be the idea. Queen b7, knight takes e5, rook takes a7, rook takes a7, queen takes a7. We have a bunch of exchanges here, but white's pawn center's very, very mobile. And this promises a very, very large advantage. Okay, e5. So yeah, it's going to be pretty tough to play from here on out. Black is just getting squeezed. I'm not sure if Unzicker might have seen all these lines after queen c7, but he probably had a pretty good feeling that this is going south quick. So he tries knight e8 instead of queen c7. And here the game follows with bishop c2. Now the bishop is getting out of the way. We might bring this rook over to a1. Knight c7. Interesting, right? These knights are maneuvering around, but from here this guy is not really doing much, and neither is he. He has actually no jumps, no squares to go to. These pieces are getting strangled pretty quickly here. Karpov just continues with his plan. Comfortably plays rook e8 to 1, rook e to a1, queen e7. And Karpov continues with his mysterious play here. Bishop b1. No need to rush, right? No need to rush at all. We have everything that we want, and black really doesn't have any counterplay at all. The positioning of his pieces doesn't favor him opening up the game either. So he doesn't have a lot here going on. His pieces are so much more passive, especially these two knights that they're not really doing anything. You open up the game here, you're probably going to get killed because you essentially have two pieces less in this position. So bishop e8, just waiting around. So he's saying, well, basically, all right, you got a good position, but how do you convert this? Because even though black is not doing great, he's still very, very solid. So here comes Karpov with knight e2. Knight d8, again trying to find squares for our boys here, the knights. Knight h2. Bishop g7, f4, and f6. Here, Unzicker missed a pretty good opportunity to kind of fight. His position is still not great, but I think if you keep the position closed, you're just going to get strangled here. So he could have tried e takes f4, knight takes f4, and f6. You know, kind of opening up the square for the knight like we saw earlier was a good plan to bring the knight f7 and e5 and just be as solid as possible. Queen f2. Then we're going to have knight f7 coming in, and bishop d4. So the knight makes it to where it's wanting to go, knight e5. And even though this knight sucks, for lack of a better word, it's doing a pretty important job here defending a8 so that black isn't losing a full rook here. But pretty strong move for Karpov with rook a7. The position is still very bad for black, but they're still fighting. This isn't a decisive advantage quite yet. Black has some things going for him, like the knight on e5. He's very, very solid, and it's going to be very hard for white to break through here. But it's difficult to play when you're constantly being submitted to so much pressure and, you know, constantly being forced to make the right decisions. Eventually you're going to crack, right? And it's even hard to say that f6 is a bad move, but it's just little moves, small details that keep adding it up and adding up. And here, the problem with f6, and Karpov highlights it very, very well, is white has a super, super strong response here. So yeah, we can see the positioning of the pieces isn't what we would call great, and the only open file in the game, well, white has complete domination of it, plus they got more space in the center, plus their knights are more mobile. This bishop, maybe not the best, but it's doing its thing, and now we're going to find a pretty good job for it. So, as they say, when you have the advantage, you have to attack. Well, Karpov goes for it. e5, creating that second front that we've been talking about, going for this king side attack. Says the start of a beautiful positional attack on the light squares, where this guy's going to be key. Due to the queen side congestion, black isn't able to react in any satisfactory manner. So we have g5, I guess, you know, trying to close out the position. There were several options here. Well, not several, but there was knight f7 that Unzicker could have tried, but then there would follow knight g3, bishop h6. We see the idea there of knight f7 covering the h6 square, queen f2, bishop t7, and h4, and h5 is coming. And you really can't stop it. Knight g4 is coming. The bishop on b1 could potentially get activated if you do any exchanges on f5. It's tough. It's a tough life for this guy over here who must be watching in horror as everything is unfolding. It's like, what are you guys doing to me? You're going to get me killed. g5, trying to close out the position. Bishop c2 and bishop f7. Karpov just happily continues rearranging here. Knight g3. We see here bishop c2 there's most likely going to be some plans here. Some piece is going to go to D1, and we're going to start highlighting all these weaknesses in the light squares, which is where these pieces are going to now. So we have knight b7. This looks like what the heck can I move kind of move. And here we see it, bishop d1. So the bishop all of a sudden is not doing anything on b1. And now it's becoming an instrumental piece in the attack in the weakened white squares, the king side. So even though the position is blocked off here with his pawns, he's still finding really good use for it. Bishops don't move like that. Really good move use for it here on this diagonal, which together with the knight and probably the queen is in a, this bishop will move out of the way. I'm guessing the queen is probably going to reroute here to d1 as well. We're starting to get good amount of pressure on the king side. So basically Unzicker is losing on both sides of the board, which is sad. h6. Our dear friend, the commentator, states that Karpov is right when saying that black should not play this move unless white forces it with h3, h4. Okay. Yeah, basically, I mean, what else are you going to do, right? There's a couple of options here. But basically, the problem with this move is that you're further weakening the light square. So this is kind of the only guy here that was doing some sort of thing, protecting the white squares along with the bishop, and now we're moving him too. And just creating a weaker complex here of light squares on the king side. Other options, queen e8, you know, kind of transferring the queen over to the light square, since we've established a million times that that's the problem now. Bishop f3 and h5, refusing to die quietly and just going here for some sort of counter strike. So queen e2, h4, knight gf1, and white still has to find the optimal way to open the king side with g2, g3, and h3, h4. So yeah, there's a lot of play still left here. Obviously anybody would prefer white in a heartbeat, but still a lot of game left. So we have bishop f3 instead of knight d8. Or excuse me, instead of h5, which is marked as an interesting move. Knight d8 really doesn't make a big difference. Queen e2, again highlighting the light squares, king h8, and bishop h5. Removing the only guy here that's doing anything to defend our boy on h8. But h6, a move that Karpov was kind of happy to see. So bishop h5. Bringing those pieces over to the king side. And if we can exchange that bishop, that would be great, because then we would have... Say that these guys disappeared off the board, right? We would have these two knights against these two knights. No question of which knights are better. And then, let's take all these green squares away. We would have this bishop against this bishop. No question here on which bishop is better. This bishop is practically never going to play here on g7. It's just a fat pawn. And then, of course, we have these two rooks against these two rooks. Again, no question as to which pieces are better. So all of Karpov's pieces would be better once these bishops get exchanged. Queen e8, but of course he doesn't rush. He continues building the pressure. And here he goes with queen d1. Unzicker plays knight d8 for like the 17th time in this game. It's becoming difficult and challenging just to find good and useful moves to play. Rook a3. Karpov kind of known for this. Commentator says he's just kind of playing cat and mouse a little bit. Almost feels like a taunt, that rook a3, right? You're just taunting his opponent, like, what are you going to do, king b7, knight b7 again, or king h8, or are you going to do, actually he goes for king f8. Rook 1, a2, king g8. What a position, right? Black can't do anything. When you know it's bad when you can afford to play moves like rook a3 and rook a2 and your opponent still can't do anything. So we have knight g4, and king f8. So the problem here, of course, with bishop takes h5, you might think, well, knight g4 is just blundering a piece. What the heck is going on? Not quite. After this, queen h5, you have knight takes f6 check. And you're losing the queen. Very, very strong discovered attack. So, a big problem here. Knight g4, and now we have knight e3. King g8. Finally, Karpov decides now it's time to take that bishop. There are several ways that you could take that bishop. Unzicker opted for knight takes f7. Of course, queen takes f7 also exists, which in that case, finally the bishop moves. Bishop b6 with a devastating effect. You have two options here. Rook takes a3 and rook a b8. Let's go with the most logical one first, or the most obvious. I don't want to say the logical. Rook takes a3, rook b8, takes, queen h5. The queen is coming in. If you move the queen over now to defend this square, the rook is coming in. You're just winning on both sides of the board. The knight's coming into g4. You could do queen g6 and knight h5. This is just a really sad position. And then knight takes a7. Oh, the other option was, instead of taking an a3, you have rook a b8, which in that case, bishop takes c7, and after rook takes c7, you still go with queen h5. It doesn't matter here that the advantage is just of such an absolute nature that you could exchange the pieces and all your problems are still there. Knight takes h5, king f7, rook a7 coming in, takes, rook a8. Again, highlighting the poor placement of black's pieces. It says, due to black's passive and hanging minor pieces, black is going to lose the pawn on b5. For instance, after rook d7, just rook b8. Obviously, you can't come with the king to defend the knight on d8, because kind of the same thing, right? You could just exchange here on g7, I'm guessing, and just go rook b5, and then you're going to have a passed pawn here on the b file and still going to have better pieces. So Unzicker decides for knight takes f7, seeing that any other capture here is just losing. Queen h5. The queen finally infiltrates on those light squares, which is the main drawback, right, of capturing with the knight here, that the queen is immediately entering the weakened light squares. Then Unzicker opted here to play knight d8 for the 29th time in the game. The other option here would have been knight h8, which is a very, very sad looking move. It says that although this move prevents queen g6, right, because the knight's kind of covering it, it leaves the knight awfully passive. I mean, anybody could have told you that. This guy here on h8 is just sad. So knight g4, this is a possible continuation, right? This isn't how the game went. Queen takes h5, knight takes h5, king f7, and then again we see this monster move, bishop b6, rook takes, rook a8, takes, and bishop d8, with a position of full Suswang. Let's take a moment here to appreciate this position and the total domination that white has. The game didn't finish like this. Obviously, Unzicker is not one to put a knight on h8, even though he did put it on d8 about 67 times. H8 is just a little bit too much. You can't move, so the pawns are blocked off. If you move this guy anywhere, like he only has 2 jumps, the knight's falling off the board, right? So that doesn't work. This guy has no jumps, he only has 1. I could take you there. Thank you very much for the free knight. If the bishop moves, f6 is dropping. f6 is dropping anyway, right? So, I mean, bishop f8 might be your best move, and it's still bad. And then if the king moves, f6 is dropping as well. If he moves here, for instance, right? If he goes to e8, well, I guess you could just take here and then take on h6 or take on f6. You're always dropping something. King e8, you also have bishop takes f6. So you just... Black literally has absolutely no move. What an amazing position, right? Unzicker for this reason, probably. This line's not too easy, not too hard to see. Goes for knight d8, hoping for the best, knowing that the worst is coming. Queen g6. Where are you gonna move? It's just very, very sad. King f8, and the knight comes in with a devastating effect, right? Well, if you take this, if you take the lady over here, just f takes, and this knight's coming in with the catastrophic effect here onto f5, and the pawn on g6 would be doing an extraordinary job of covering the light squares here on the king side, and it really can't be attacked at all. So that's kind of how the game finished. Queen f7 would be the only other option, and then just knight g4. And same thing, right? f6 is going to drop, or h6 is going to drop, or you have to take here, and when you get to that really depressing position again. And Unzicker just basically says here, stop. Please, I've had enough. This is too much. Why are you doing this to me? I thought we were friends. What a game. One of Karpov's best games. Again, all of this thanks to this paralyzing and devastating move in this position. Let me see if I can go back to it. After queen d8, which was marked as a bad move, punishing it with bishop a7. What an extraordinary move. It's completely blocking the a file so that white could take control of that, and then shift his attention over to the king side and start a decisive attack along the white squares. Extraordinary game. Here we see again another game. This is I think the third game that we go over from Karpov, where his opponent really doesn't make any obvious mistakes and just gets wiped off the board. It's just absolutely amazing, and all this thanks to his very deep and amazing positional understanding of the game. This is 1974. He was, during this time, I think it was when Fischer forfeited his match. He decided to disappear from the face of the earth once he destroyed Spassky. And Karpov was kind of out on a mission to prove that he was, in fact, the best player in the world, and that the world championship hadn't just been handed over to him. He was going to prove to everybody that he deserved to be world champion, and he was just going to actually squash everybody. And here, during this time, like the 70s and mid 70s and early 80s, until Kasparov got there, he was just on a tear, destroying absolutely everybody. And these games are really, really worth watching and studying and going over. All right, guys, so we have our game of the day in, okay?